All right, pastors and Bible study leaders, welcome to a deep dive designed specifically for you.
That's right.
2 Chronicles 7:14, it's our focus today.
We figured.
You already know the verse itself, so we're bypassing those basics.
And diving straight into the good stuff.
Think of this as like a...
Masterclass.
Yeah,
In unique approaches to this well-known passage.
exactly.
We've been analyzing sermons from pastors
Oh, wow.
all over the country.
Really?
And let me tell you, they have unearthed some truly fascinating perspectives that I think
I'm excited.
you'll appreciate.
Okay, let's unpack it.
Yeah.
One thing that jumped out at me from pretty much every sermon was how they tackled that if-then structure of the verse.
Absolutely.
God's promise.
It's conditional.
Right, it's not a blanket statement.
It hinges on some specific actions.
Yeah, and it's not just about like, oh, just believe and everything will be fine.
Right.
There's some action required.
It pushes us beyond this passive understanding of grace, doesn't it? It makes you consider, what responsibility do we bear in creating the conditions for revival, for healing to actually happen?
Like FBC Toko, they had this great
Oh, yeah.
baking analogy.
Love that.
They basically said, imagine God's promise is like a recipe, right?
Okay.
You leave out an ingredient,
Yeah.
the whole thing just flops.
It's a mess.
Like if you forget the baking powder, your cake is going to be a disaster.
You're going to have a flat pancake.
Exactly. And it's the same with this verse, right?
Yeah.
Neglecting our part in the if
Leads
to a different outcome.
a different outcome than what's promised in the then.
Completely Grace Ministries.
Yes.
They took it even further.
Oh, tell me.
They said this if-then logic isn't unique to 2 Chronicles 7:14.
Right.
It's like a recurring theme all over Scripture.
It's a pattern.
It's like this key
Yes.
to understanding how God interacts with us.
It makes you rethink a lot of those familiar passages.
It does.
Good.
And it might be worth exploring in our own studies and teachings.
I think so.
Now, another theme that emerged was this idea of historical context.
Uh-huh.
We've got to be careful.
Yeah, a lot of these sermons addressed how people commonly misapply the verse to, like, modern-day nations,
Right.
which is really interesting.
It's so easy to just claim this as like a promise for, I don't know, America.
Oh, absolutely.
But Waymark Church, they were very clear.
Yeah.
This was a specific promise
Yes, to Solomon and Israel.
at the dedication of the temple.
When you understand that historical context,
It's crucial.
it's crucial because if we're misapplying it, we might miss the true power and relevance for us today.
Yeah, we could be taking it completely out of context and getting the whole thing wrong.
Exactly.
So as we lead our congregations, what does all this mean for us?
Well, I think
Historical context is important,
absolutely.
but those core principles still speak to us today.
They absolutely do.
So it invites us to ask,
Okay.
if it wasn't about America,
Right.
what is it saying about God's response when his people humble themselves and seek him? Now, there you go.
Speaking of humility,
Yes,
that was another major theme running through a lot of these sermons.
it really was.
Almost like this,
Hidden key
yes,
that unlocks the power of this verse.
it's not just about like being quiet or meek.
Right. It's not just about being self-effacing.
The sermons dug into these deeper implications of humility,
Yeah, what does it really mean to recognize our dependence on God?
aligning our will with his
Surrendering to his plan.
Oak Hill Assembly of God. They had this powerful take on this.
Uh.
They were arguing that like national healing,
Okay.
it actually starts with the church humbling itself first.
Interesting.
It's not about pointing fingers outward,
Right.
but about examining our own hearts and actions before we call for change in others.
That's a challenging message, especially in a culture that prioritizes self-promotion and individual achievement.
Yeah, it's almost like this complete flip of the script.
It is. It is.
And Access Church,
yes.
the one that dove into the richness of the Hebrew language. Yes, they had a fascinating point about the Hebrew word for humble.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
they were talking about how it's got these layers of depth
Layers.
that we miss in our modern understanding.
It's not just about being lowly or unassuming.
It's about recognizing our inherent...
Limitations.
Yeah.
And acknowledging God's absolute sovereignty.
It's like saying, God, I can't do this on my own.
I need you.
I need your guidance, your strength, your wisdom.
It's a beautiful picture.
Now, this leads perfectly into another fascinating thread that popped up.
Okay, I'm listening.
A lot of these sermons challenged that common view of prayer
Oh, the gimme, gimme, gimme.
as just a wish list for God.
It can be so easy to fall into that trap.
It could be so easy.
Can it? Like, oh, do this. God, if you give me that. It
Yeah.
becomes this transaction.
It does.
And we miss the heart of what this passage is really all about.
It's about that relationship with him.
It is.
Emerge317.church.
Yes.
They said it beautifully.
What they say.
They said it's about seeking God's face, not just his hand.
Ooh, like
It's about that intimacy and connection,
not just getting stuff.
not just the blessings.
Yeah, they even contrasted this with the name it and claim it theology,
Oh,
where the emphasis is on manipulating God to get what we want,
wow.
rather than surrendering to his will.
It's a powerful question for us to consider.
What would it look like for our congregations to truly prioritize seeking God's presence above all else?
And how would that change their understanding of prayer?
Because it's a challenge, isn't it?
It is.
To move beyond that gimme, gimme, gimme,
To move beyond those desires.
and enter a space of genuine communion with God.
There was another theme,
Okay.
not as widespread, but equally fascinating.
I am intrigued.
I think your congregations would find this one really interesting.
Lay it on me.
The idea of consecration.
Consecration often gets relegated to those dusty theological books.
Yeah.
But these sermons brought it front and center,
They did.
really highlighting its relevance for today.
The Flame Church, they took this idea and ran with it.
I love it when pastors do that.
They focused on that Hebrew word kadash,
To be set apart
set apart.
for God's purposes.
And they emphasized that it's not just about abstaining from certain behaviors.
It's about actively dedicating ourselves,
Everything we do,
our whole lives,
to God's service.
It's a radical dedication.
It makes you think, how does that impact our actions?
Our choices, our interactions with the world,
Our online interactions, everything.
everything we do should be an act of worship.
We've covered some deep theological ground here.
We have.
But how do we translate all this into action?
Especially
Especially in a world as complex and divided as ours.
the million-dollar question, right?
What does turning from wickedness even look like in the 21st century?
The sermons offered a variety of perspectives on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was fascinating to see how they wrestled with that question.
Like what were some of the things they said?
Well, for example, Tag Church used a really provocative illustration,
Oh,
the Olympics' controversial portrayal of the Last Supper.
okay.
And they argued that these kinds of cultural moments, even if they seem purely secular on the surface,
Right.
can spark deeper conversations about our values and how we engage with art that might challenge our beliefs.
So it's not just about ignoring those things
Right. It's about engaging with them thoughtfully.
and using them as opportunities for growth and reflection.
Exactly.
And then there was Daystar Church.
Yeah, they had a very different perspective.
What did they say?
They presented seeking God's face as a call to action,
Oh, wow.
even political action,
Okay.
emphasizing that our faith shouldn't be confined to our private lives.
Oh, so it needs to inform how we engage with the world around us.
Absolutely.
But that raises a whole other set of challenges.
It does.
How do we balance our responsibility to engage with the public square with recognizing that?
Ultimately, lasting change comes from the transformation of hearts.
Not just the passing of laws.
Right. It's about changing hearts and minds.
And that leads to another crucial question.
Okay, what's that?
In a world where right and wrong are increasingly subjective,
Yeah, it seems like everyone has their own truth these days.
how do we as leaders guide our congregations to discern the real truth?
And live out their faith in a way that honors God.
It's a heavy responsibility.
It is a heavy responsibility.
And these sermons grappled with it in so many different ways.
They really did.
And we'll dive deeper into some of their insights in just a moment.
Sounds good to me. Wow, we've been unpacking some really thought-provoking stuff, haven't we?
It's amazing, though, how one little verse can spark
I know, right?
so many different angles.
It really speaks to what we're trying to do here.
It does.
Help you pastors and Bible study leaders find fresh, exciting perspectives
Yeah.
that you can bring to your congregations.
And it's not about reinventing the wheel either, right?
No.
It's not about coming up with some new,
Crazy, shocking interpretation.
to go deeper.
Digging into what's familiar.
Uncovering the hitter gems.
Yeah.
You know, before we move on,
Yeah.
I want to go back to that tension we talked about.
Okay.
The whole engaging with culture
Yes.
and staying true to our faith.
Balancing those two, yeah.
So many of these sermons were wrestling with that,
Yeah, it's a struggle we all face.
especially today.
Especially in today's world. Oh, my goodness.
Like, where do you draw the line?
Right.
Waymark Church,
Okay.
the one about historical context.
Yeah.
They had a helpful perspective.
What was that?
They said, you know, even though 2 Chronicles 7:14 was directed at Solomon
Uh-huh.
and Israel,
Right, specifically.
there is a universal principle at play here.
There is.
When God's people humble themselves,
And seek him.
he responds,
It's a promise that transcends time and place.
regardless of our context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's cultural challenges, personal struggles, whatever,
It doesn't matter what you're facing.
that same posture
Of humility
and dependence
is key.
is essential for experiencing God's power.
And his blessing.
So it's not about
Finding the perfect political solution.
right or some cultural strategy
It's about aligning our hearts with God.
and seeking his guidance
Yes.
in every area of our life.
That's a message I think our congregations really need to hear right now.
Oh, absolutely.
In a world that's bombarding them with
So many voices.
so many voices, so many different ideologies,
Yeah. They need to know how to discern,
truth from falsehood,
stand firm in their convictions
and engage with the world.
in a way that reflects Christ.
It's not easy,
Not easy.
but it's essential.
And that leads us back to consecration,
Yes.
which we were talking about earlier.
It's set apart.
The Flame Church.
Yes.
They talked about it.
It's not just about avoiding certain behaviors.
It's a mindset
It's a way of life
that reflects our identity.
as God's children.
So we need to let that identity just permeate everything we do.
Everything.
Our families, our work, how we use our resources,
Our online interactions.
how we treat each other.
Every single aspect of our lives.
And, as we're talking about this,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the practical side of things.
Okay, I like where you're going with this.
What does this look like Monday morning?
Yeah, when people are back in their routine.
Facing real-life challenges
How do we bridge that gap?
between the theological and the everyday.
The rubber meets the road.
Exactly.
And I think these sermons had some good insights on that.
What were some of the things they said?
Well, one thing that stood out was the emphasis on prayer.
It's easy to just think of it as asking God for stuff.
Oh, yeah?
Our spiritual shopping list.
I need this. I want that.
God, I need a new car.
God, please heal my aunt.
God, please help me win the lottery.
It can be so transactional.
It can be.
But remember, Emerge 3:17,
Yeah.
they talked about seeking God's face,
Not his hand.
not just his hand.
It's about that relationship.
It's about cultivating that intimacy.
It's not about getting stuff.
Right. It's about being with him,
And they actually contrasted that.
with that name it and claim it approach,
Oh, wow, yeah.
which can focus more on manipulating God
Then surrendering,
to will.
which is a challenge.
It is a challenge.
But it's in that surrender
When we let go of our own agendas
that we truly open ourselves up
to experiencing God's power
and his presence.
in a transformative way.
And it's interesting.
Right.
A lot of these sermons connected prayer with intercession.
That's powerful.
It's not just about praying for ourselves,
It's about standing in the gap for others,
pleading for God's mercy,
for our communities,
for our nation,
for the world.
even for those we might disagree with.
It's a beautiful picture of unity.
Tag Church.
Yeah.
They had a great message about this.
What'd they say?
Remember how they used that Olympics example?
Yeah, with the Last Supper.
They said those cultural moments
Even the controversial ones.
should spur us to pray,
Not to complain,
not to criticize,
but to intercede.
to seek his guidance.
In navigating those tough situations,
When that intercession,
it's a powerful reminder that prayer isn't passive.
it's not.
It's a weapon.
It is.
It's a force that can move mountains.
Change hearts
It's partnering with God.
to bring about his purposes.
And we have the responsibility as pastors and teachers
Yeah.
to equip our congregations to pray like that,
To teach them to pray with power
with purpose,
and with hearts that are aligned with God.
not their own desires.
And to see that it's not just about getting stuff from God.
You're right.
It's about joining him in his redemptive work.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It moves us beyond.
The me-centered approach
Yeah.
and invites us into something so much better.
It does.
It's the story of God's love
And it connects beautifully with humility
and consecration,
because it's in that humility,
recognizing our need for him,
surrendering our own agendas,
that we become truly consecrated
vessels for his purposes, and
Yes.
as we yield to him
as we seek his face.
and intercede
We become active participants.
in his plan to heal and restore.
It all comes full circle.
It really does.
Now, we've been focusing on the more abstract theological side of things,
We have.
but I'm curious, what about the practical applications?
Yeah. The sermon illustrations.
Yeah, because at the end of the day,
We need to translate these ideas into something tangible
that people can grasp.
and apply to their lives.
You're absolutely right.
So tell me.
Thankfully, these sermons were full of creative examples.
Really?
We'll get into those in the next segment.
All right, we're back.
For the final leg of our deep dive into 2 Chronicles 7:14.
My mind is just buzzing
I'm right.
with all these fresh perspectives.
It's so exciting to see
It is.
how these pastors have taken this familiar passage
And breathed new life into it.
yeah, given us a fresh lens to look through.
You mentioned earlier
Yeah.
that the sermons were full of creative illustrations.
Oh, absolutely.
What were some that really stood out to you?
Well, one that comes to mind is Magnolia Church PN. Oh.
They were the ones focusing on grace.
Right?
They had this really memorable analogy.
Oh.
They compared God's transformative power to restoring a rusty car.
Okay.
Like on that show, Rust to Riches.
Oh, yeah.
Taking something that seems completely beyond repair
Right.
and turning it into something beautiful.
It's a great example of connecting with culture
Yeah,
in a way that makes it relatable.
absolutely.
I can just imagine people
Nodding their heads.
thinking about their own
Rust buckets.
that God's working on.
Exactly.
No matter how far gone we feel
God's grace can restore us.
to wholeness.
And Waymark Church, the one that emphasized historical context,
Yeah.
they used a series of analogies I found really compelling.
Oh, I love a good analogy.
Me too.
What were they?
They presented 3 images to illustrate restoration.
Okay.
A broken object,
Okay.
a stray dog,
All right.
and a struggling plant.
Okay. Break those down for me. Yeah. So with the broken object, it's that careful, patient work of putting the pieces back together.
Oh, I like that.
It acknowledges that healing can be a slow process.
It can be.
It takes time.
Yeah.
And then there was the stray dog.
Okay.
It emphasized earning trust, showing love to something that's been hurt.
That's powerful.
Especially when you think about how many people in our congregations have been wounded.
And are hesitant to let God in.
Exactly. They've built up those walls.
Yeah, you have.
And then lastly, the struggling plant.
Okay.
Highlighting the importance of the right conditions for growth.
Sometimes we need that nurturing
That's some
life environment
thrive.
spiritually.
It's not just about fixing what's broken.
It's about creating an atmosphere where people can blossom.
As we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I keep thinking about how 2 Chronicles 7:14,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about personal transformation
It's about letting that transformation spill out.
into the world.
Daystar Church, they were big on that.
Yes, the ones encouraging political action
They said that seeking God's face should compel us to act.
on the things that break his heart.
Be advocates for justice.
Care for the marginalized,
Work for peace and reconciliation.
which can be a daunting task.
It can.
So where do we even begin?
That's a great question.
Well, I think the first step is awareness,
Okay.
paying attention to the needs around us.
Listening to those who are often overlooked.
Yes, and then letting our faith inform our response.
So it's not just about grand gestures or political campaigns.
It's about the everyday choices,
The way we treat our neighbors.
the causes we support.
The way we use our resources.
Exactly. It's about letting our faith permeate every aspect of our lives.
Letting our transformed life be a beacon of hope.
Because the world needs it.
And, as pastors and Bible study leaders,
You have an incredible opportunity.
to empower your congregations to do this.
Help them connect the dots between their faith and their actions.
Equip them to be agents of change.
In their own spheres of influence.
It's about reminding them that the then of 2 Chronicles 7:14,
The healing, the restoration,
it's not something we just wait for.
it's something we actively participate in.
We partner with God.
And let his transforming power work through us.
As you go back and delve deeper into these sermons,
Yeah.
ask yourself, what is God saying to me through this passage?
How is he calling me to respond?
How can I equip my congregation to live this out?
Keep wrestling with those questions.
Keep seeking his face.
And keep trusting that he will guide you.
Because this isn't just about studying a passage,
It's about a way of life.
a posture of humility and surrender
Allowing God to work in and through us.
in extraordinary ways.
Who knows? Maybe as you explore these themes,
Yeah.
you'll uncover an even deeper layer of meaning.
The new insight
A fresh application.
that speaks directly to the hearts of your listeners.
That's the beauty of engaging with Scripture.
Always more to discover,
More to learn.
more to be challenged by.
So let this deep dive be a springboard
For further exploration, for deeper conversations,
for a renewed commitment to seeking God.
and living out the truths of 2 Chronicles 7:14.
We pray this journey has sparked your imagination
Ignited a passion for this ancient text
and equipped you to guide your congregations
toward a deeper understanding of God's heart.
for healing and restoration.